Kingston removes their statue of Sir John A. MacDonald over the residential school policy. This is the Great White North Report. Last Friday, the statue of Sir John A. MacDonald was taken off its pedestal in Kingston, Ontario. A group of about 100 people were at the scene and they expressed mixed emotions. I remember that not too long ago, CBC did a thing on the top 10 Canadians in the world. And this is how they ranked them. Tommy Douglas, Terry Fox, Pierre Trudeau, Banting, Suzuki, Pearson, Don Cherry, who's now been cancelled. Sir John A. MacDonald was number 8 of the top 10 most influential Canadians. To most people, he's one of the Canadian icons. Now they're removing statues of him in this woke period of our history. And I'm not happy with the decision to remove a founding father from his place, because he was from Kingston after emigrating from Scotland. He was a man who had great faults but great vision, and he helped us become a country. They removed it from its perch in the city park in Kingston, where it stood since 1895, so this has stood over there for over 100 years. They did this around 8:45 a.m., so not too many people would notice. Now, the Kingston Council voted 12-1 after a long meeting on Wednesday to move the statue to nearby Cataraqui Cemetery, where the Father Confederation is buried, after many in the community object to its presence because of the MacDonald's role in the residential school system. So this is just new. Now, I'm going to give one thing. Yes, his government started the residential school policy. He didn't think of the idea. Someone else did. Brought the idea to his cabinet. They approved. It's a government process. It had to go through the House of Commons. So everybody in that government has to be cancelled now. The thing is, what bothers me about this most is that the residential schools were taken over by the Department of Indian Affairs, which is another government organization, in 1969. The government decided to phase out the schools, but was met with resistance by the Catholic Church, and some Indigenous communities wanted to keep denominational schools open or transfer their own control. So even then, there's a debate on who should get control of these schools. Should they remain open? And by 1986, most of the schools that had been closed were turned over to the local bands. 10 years later, the last one finally closed its doors. So that's 1996. Now, when you look at this, they went after the guy who, at the top, the guy who was in charge of the country when these residential schools started. Well, guess what? Shit runs downhill. So by removing the guy at the top, now you have to start removing the guys at the bottom. John A., Alexander Mackenzie, who was a nobody. Abbott was a nobody. Thompson was a nobody. Bowell and Tupper were nobodies. Sir Wilfrid Laurier, his statue should be removed too for the same thing, because he kept it going. Robert Borden, our wartime leader, he too kept it going. Mackenzie King, our World War II leader, he also continued the tradition of the residential schools. Louis Saint Laurent, same thing. Diefenbaker, Lester B. Pearson. Pierre Trudeau is when they started closing the schools and transferring control, but he was still there. The father or stepfather, depending how you look at it, of our current Prime Minister, he continued this policy all the way till even Mulroney didn't exactly. Mulroney was already dying. Residential schools were dying out, and he didn't have to do much. Finally died out during Chrétien's years. So all these prime ministers should have their statues removed as well, as should any premiers, any government officials who didn't object to this back in the day, should also have any records removed. That's what should happen, but because we're doing the guy at the top, the shit runs downhill. Eventually they'll get to all these other people and find faults with them. I am against removing a statue of our founding father, especially in the place where he came from in Canada, and they're redoing this as a knee-jerk reaction to what happened in Kamloops, what they discovered, which was a horrible tragedy, and I wish they would just exhume the bodies and find out exactly what happened. Was it one mass grave, or they just reused the grave? How old are these kids, who they are, and set up a memorial? We've already been through this. That's the other thing that gets me. It keeps opening up the fresh wound, and our media does not help. So like I said, by 96, they'd all been closed. So Indigenous communities often with church support, and since 1998, with government financial assistance, have been carrying out the difficult work of supporting their members with long-term impact of residential schools, including family breakdowns, violence, and aimlessness. Beginning in the 1990s, former students demanded the government and churches publicly acknowledge their role in the schools and provide compensation for their suffering. So 2005, they established $1.9 billion compensation package for the survivors of abuse at residential schools. So already we've given a lot of money. Was it enough? Probably not. But we can't give an endless supply of money. If they want, I'll cut foreign aid to other countries and give it to the Indigenous communities. Will that help? I'm all for that. 2007, the government and churches operated the schools agreed to provide financial compensation to former students under the Residential School Settlement Agreement. So in 2007, we already have a residential agreement. 2008, Prime Minister Harper, on behalf of the Government of Canada, offered an apology to all former students. Openly recognized the assimilation policy in which schools were established was wrong. Has caused great harm and no place in our country. That's 2008. He's the first guy, so that means all our prime ministers did not issue a formal apology. Why aren't they being cancelled? Now, the apology and the compensation packages did not include Newfoundland and Labrador. Why? Because they weren't part of Canada at the time the schools operated. But they did reach a settlement of $50 million in May 2016, approved by Newfoundland and the Labrador Supreme Court. Again, 2017, Prime Minister Justine Trudeau formally apologized to survivors of residential school in Newfoundland and Labrador, so he completed what Harper had already done. They also established national historic sites for 2 of them. So we've already been through this. How much longer are we going to have to drag it out? How much longer are we going to have to open up the wound and bring everything out, and then every new government has to do something more drastic? MacDonald's vilified for the whole system. It's all rest on him. A group of Indigenous-led activists camped out in the park for several days so they would stay there until the monument was taken down. In other words, they're going to stay there and not have any jobs and become bums. Now, I can understand the Indigenous population being upset, but at the same time, they have to realize that eventually it comes to a point where enough is enough. We've done everything we can. Move on with your life. Now, I support these guys. 2 veterans carrying Canadian flags briefly and stood in front of the statue to block construction equipment and objected to its removal. They stepped down after speaking with police. Peacefully, instead of like those idiots in Montreal who tore down the statue of MacDonald. It's been part of Kingston for over 100 years. And Jeff McLaren, the lone Kingston city councillor, voted against the statue relocation, said the decision will further divide the community. And it's true. If anything, they should have just added something to the plaque that's there saying that he started the disastrous Indigenous residential school policy. Basically, these city councillors succumbed to the woke mob in the far left. Right now, what are we going to celebrate? Mediocrity. When all your heroes are denounced and put away, all we're left with is mediocrity. Now I got to celebrate a bunch of people I never even heard of. It's a shame. Canada's slipping into mediocrity. Anyway, anyone out there, any Canadians out there, let me know what you guys think of the Sir John A. Macdonald statues being taken down and what should have been done in its place. Have we done enough already? Could we do more? Leave comments below, hit the like button, subscribe, and until next time, this has been the Great White North Report.